Luxury hotel, a Hollywood icon humiliated. But just as the crowd turns silent, Clint Eastwood steps in. What happens next leaves the entire lobby stunned. Join me till end of this video and subscribe my channel for more. Sandra Bullock, dressed in a simple black coat and sunglasses, stepped into the grand lobby of the Carlton Crest, one of the most exclusive hotels on the West Coast. She wasn't there for attention. No red carpet, no interviews. Just a weekend of silence before her next project. But silence, it turned out, was not on the menu. The marble floors echoed beneath her heels as she walked toward the front desk. The receptionist, a young woman in a sharp navy uniform, barely glanced up. She was too busy laughing at something on her phone with a coworker. Sandra cleared her throat gently. "Hi. I have a reservation under Bullock." The receptionist glanced up, her smile fading to a neutral wall. She looked Sandra over, the hat, the lack of makeup, the plain style, and didn't recognize her immediately. "Are you sure?" she said, tone flat. "We don't take walk-ins." Sandra offered a gentle smile. "I'm not a walk-in." The woman tapped a few keys, then looked up, smirking. "We don't have anything under Bullock. You might be at the wrong place. There's a motel 2 blocks down." The comment was meant to be quiet, but the lobby wasn't empty. A couple seated near the fireplace exchanged looks. A bellhop hesitated as he rolled by. Sandra's smile faded. She adjusted her glasses. "Could you check again, please?" The receptionist sighed dramatically, like she was being forced to tolerate. Someone beneath her. "Look, we don't have you. Maybe you used a fake name to sound important. Happens all the time." That was when a voice cut across the lobby, calm, steady, familiar, deep as the desert. "She doesn't need a fake name. M.A.M. She is Sandra Bullock." Heads turned. The lobby grew still. The receptionist blinked in confusion. Standing near the entrance, leaning slightly on a cane, was Clint Eastwood. Hat in hand, eyes locked on the desk like it was a target. He stepped forward slowly, each stride deliberate. Sandra looked over, stunned. "Clint?" He gave a soft nod, never breaking eye contact with the receptionist. "You might want to start over before you embarrass this whole place." The lobby, moments ago filled with murmurs and clinking glasses, now stood in a breathless hush. Clint Eastwood's voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the kind of weight that demanded attention. The receptionist blinked at him, confused, then let out a dry laugh, trying to save face. "Sir, I'm just following policy." "If there's no record," Clint raised a hand gently. That was enough to silence her mid-sentence. He stepped forward, his boots echoing softly on the marble. His eyes, weathered by decades on camera and in life, held no rage, just a quiet, measured disappointment that stung worse than any shouting ever could. "Policy is one thing," he said. "Humiliating someone who's done more for this country's spirit than you'll ever understand. That's something else entirely." Sandra stood still, her hands gently clasped, trying to hold her composure. Clint's presence beside her wasn't just comforting, it was like having the embodiment of old-school honor. Standing in her corner, the receptionist's confidence wavered. Her coworker had long stepped away from the desk, pretending to organize papers that didn't need organizing. A manager, alerted by the sudden change in energy, rushed over. "Mr. Eastwood," the manager said breathlessly. "Is there an issue?" Clint didn't look away from the receptionist. "You ever humiliate someone you owe an apology to before?" he asked. The manager turned to Sandra, his face going pale when realization hit him. "Miss Bullock, I'm terribly sorry. You're sweet. Is ready. There was a system." "Don't," Clint interrupted softly. "Just own it. Don't blame the system when it was her judgment that failed." The crowd in the lobby wasn't huge, maybe a dozen people, but every single one of them was watching. Some held their phones, not recording, but frozen. This wasn't a viral moment. It was a lesson. The receptionist's lip trembled slightly. I didn't recognize her." "You didn't need to," Clint replied. "Respect isn't earned through fame. It's given until someone proves they don't deserve it." The manager gestured quickly to the bellhop, who appeared out of nowhere and offered to take Sandra's bag. She accepted politely, still quiet, still stunned. As they turned toward the elevators, Clint gave her a small nod. "You all right?" Sandra smiled gently. "I wasn't, but I think I am now." Before stepping in, Clint turned back to the receptionist, who stood behind the counter like a statue made of regret. "Next time, you might want to greet your guests like they matter," he said. "Because some of them walk in wearing sunglasses, and some of them walk in wearing history." The penthouse suite was as grand as promised, sweeping views of the city skyline, polished oak floors, fresh white roses in crystal vases. But Sandra didn't seem to notice any of it. She dropped her coat over a chair, stood by the window, and watched the world far below. Clint entered a few steps behind, not saying anything at first. He moved like a man who'd seen beauty and suffering in equal parts, and learned that silence is often the kindest companion, you know? Sandra said finally, "It's not the first time something like that's happened." Her voice wasn't angry, just tired, honest. "I don't usually speak up. People expect me to smile through it. Be grateful I'm even recognized. But today, I don't know, it just stung a little more." She turned, her eyes meeting his. "Why'd you step in?" Clint shrugged. A subtle gesture. "Because someone should have, and because I've lived long enough to know what quiet disrespect looks like." He sat in the armchair across from her, folding his hands slowly. "You've spent years carrying stories that weren't yours. Playing characters, comforting people through screens, showing up when others didn't. And the moment you asked for something as small as respect, they treated you like a stranger." Sandra's eyes welled, but she didn't let the tears fall. "I didn't want anyone to make a scene." "You didn't," he said gently. "You showed grace, the rest of us just needed to catch up." She laughed softly, wiping under one. You've got that Clint Eastwood way of making people cry without raising your voice." He smiled, just barely. "Comes with age." There was a pause. Then Sandra sat down across from him. "Do you ever feel tired of always being strong?" Clint looked out toward the skyline, the sun casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. "All the time. But strength isn't about being tough. It's about showing up when someone else needs you to." And in that moment, it was clear this wasn't just about a rude receptionist or a botched check-in. It was about something deeper, the pressure of being kind in a world that often isn't, and the loneliness of carrying grace like armor. The light in the suite had grown softer now, golden from the sinking sun. Outside, the city roared with the usual noise, car horns, distant sirens, the steady rhythm of life. But inside, it was calm. It was real. Clint leaned back in the armchair, one leg crossed over the other. His hands, rough and strong, rested over the armrest like they'd done in 1,000 westerns. But now, they weren't part of a performance. They were just his. "You ever heard of a town called Lone Butte?" he asked, breaking the silence. Sandra shook her head. "Did a picture out there in the 70s? Nothing big. But while we were filming, there was this diner I used to visit every morning. Run by an old woman named Margaret, no teeth, all stories. She'd serve burnt coffee and smile like it was the finest roast in Paris." He chuckled gently. "One day she didn't show up. Just a sign that said, 'Closed.' Back soon, she never came back. Heart attack in her sleep. No family. No funeral. The town moved on in 5 minutes." Sandra listened closely, unsure where the story was going but drawn in by his voice. "I went to her diner anyway. Sat at the counter, waited. I don't know why. Maybe because no one else would. Maybe because people like her deserve to be remembered?" He looked at Sandra now, his eyes softer. "Sometimes it's not about fixing what's wrong. It's about not letting the world forget who mattered." Sandra's gaze dropped to her hands. "You're saying people will forget me one day?" Clint shook his head slowly. "No, I'm saying people like that receptionist already had, and it's our job to remind them." A long silence followed. Then Sandra stood and walked toward the window again. "Do you ever feel like being known makes you invisible?" Clint stood too, walked beside her. The two stood side by side, their reflections framed against the glass. "Fame makes noise," he said. "But respect? That's quiet. You felt invisible because you were expecting someone to see the real. You, that takes more than eyes?" That takes honor?" And with those words something shifted between them, not in a romantic way, but in a human way. A bond, a shared understanding that behind the glamour, the scripts, and the smiles, they were both just people trying to stay kind in a world that forgets kindness. The next morning, the Carlton Crest was back to its normal rhythm. Suitcases rolled across the marble floors. The scent of roasted coffee drifted through the air. Staff in crisp uniforms moved, with rehearsed precision, but there was a quiet tension humming beneath it all. Word had spread. Everyone on the staff had heard what happened the day before, how a receptionist had humiliated a guest, and how Clint Eastwood had witnessed. It died in the lobby. The manager stood nervously at the front desk, eyes flicking between the elevators and his clipboard. Nearby, the receptionist from the day before looked smaller than usual, her eyes red-rimmed, her confidence gone. Then the elevator chimed. Sandra Bullock stepped out alone. No sunglasses. No hat, no entourage. She wore a simple cream blazer, her hair down, and walked with the kind of poise that turned silence into spotlight. Everyone noticed. She didn't walk fast. She didn't avoid eye contact. She approached the front desk calmly. The receptionist froze, unsure of what to say. "Good morning," Sandra said warmly. The receptionist opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Sandra leaned slightly forward. "I just wanted to say, we all have bad days. But next time someone walks in here, whether she's an actress, a teacher, or a woman who just lost her husband, remember that your words matter." Her tone wasn't scolding. It was compassionate, honest, because you never know what someone's carrying behind a smile. She paused, then nodded softly. "I forgive you." The receptionist blinked, visibly trembling now. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean..." Sandra offered a kind smile and stepped away. The lobby was silent again, but not in fear this time, in reverence. No grand speech, no PR statement. Just a woman who showed what real dignity looks like, and there, in the corner near the lounge, Clint Eastwood watched. He said nothing. Just lifted a small paper cup of black coffee in quiet salute. As Sandra walked toward the exit, their eyes met once more. He gave a small nod, the kind that means you did good. She nodded back. "See. You around, cowboy." "Always." And with that, she walked out into the morning light. Stronger, freer, and unforgettable. The day had stretched long and slow, like a western sun melting across the horizon. Clint Eastwood sat alone now in the back patio of the hotel's rooftop. A mug of black coffee in his hands, the city sprawling beneath him. He wasn't a man for crowds anymore. Not the kind that cheered or chased autographs. He preferred this, watching people, watching moments, watching character unfold. A young waiter approached shyly. "Mr. Eastwood, sir, that was, something downstairs, what you did." "What she did?" Clint didn't respond right away. He took a sip, then looked out at the skyline. "You know," he said slowly, "the world doesn't give awards for kindness. There's no headline for standing tall in silence. But that's the stuff that actually changes things." The waiter nodded, unsure if he should stay or go. Clint continued, eyes narrowed on the fading horizon. Sandra didn't fight back with fame. She didn't swing a punch. She just reminded that girl of something the world keeps forgetting. Respect isn't earned by power. It's earned by how you treat people with none. He let that sit in the air like a final note in an old song. "She was stronger than me yesterday," Clint added, half to himself. "And I faced bullets." Back in the lobby, guests continued to check in and out. No one spoke of the moment like gossip. It had already become something else, something sacred. The story would pass from bellhop to bartender, from manager to maid, a quiet legend in the halls of the Carlton Crest. And for Sandra, she never mentioned it again in an interview. Never posted about it. Never taught anyone a lesson online. But that receptionist, she never forgot. She would later become a manager herself. And every time someone walked in, tired, anxious, alone, she'd remember the day Clint Eastwood didn't raise his voice. And Sandra Bullock stood taller than ever, and somewhere far from the flashbulbs and fame, Clint Eastwood rode out of that hotel lobby the way he did in every great Story quietly, without thanks, and just when he was needed most.